Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to SBAM's Small Business Briefing. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications at SBAM, and we will be joined by Brian Calley. He's going to be joining us later in the show. So today is the Monday, May 16th edition, and as always, we would like to start by saying thank you to our sponsor, Marana Group. Marana Group is a data, document, and distribution company in Kalamazoo. So we have quite a few things to get to today, but our first will be welcoming a special guest, Marion Siebert. Last week, we published a story on website accessibility from our friends at the American Society of Employers. We shared it in our newsletter, and we can drop that here. But website accessibility is a pretty important topic, and we wanted to do a deeper dive. So I've invited our website manager, Brightly, to talk more, and Marion is one of those co-founders. So Marion, before we dive into accessibility, welcome to the show. Could you please share a little bit about Brightly and your role?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the co-founder and CXO of Brightly. We help companies with web, mobile, and software. Pretty simple. And with larger companies, we provide strategic consulting, digital transformation, and customer experience consulting.
And we've been working with you for several years now. You have a wonderful team. We work with the company mostly based in GR in Grand Rapids. So we've had a wonderful experience. But for those of us who are tuned in who might not completely understand, give us a little background on what accessibility means.
Absolutely. So accessibility, or ADA compliance, is what you might have heard it referred to as, is the Americans with Disability Act. So it basically is a law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. It was created in 1990, and that was before websites were really a thing, but now it does apply to websites. Around in 2008. The Department of Justice has been enforcing this for websites as well. So really what this means is if you're a business, and especially if you're a business with a physical location, this applies to your website as well. So it means that your website needs to be usable for people with vision impairments, people that are hard of hearing, people that have difficulty with mobility. And there are different ways that you can make your website easy for them to use. Some of it's through design and how your site looks. Some of it is through how your website is built and developed. And some of it is how the content exists on your website and how it's entered.
So I know we've talked about this because I do work really closely with you in managing SBAM's website, and it's certainly always going to be a work in progress. But what are the laws governing accessibility as it pertains to websites?
Yeah, so the laws around ADA compliance are a little bit squishy. So there is no official checklist for technical standards or official guidelines. The Department of Justice, who is the enforcer of the ADA compliance, is, it looks to Congress to write those rules. And, in the tech world, things are always evolving, so it's a little bit difficult to push laws through that fast. So the unofficial guidelines that most people use are called the WCAG guidelines, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines.
And what are some of those basic principles? So if somebody we can all go and Google that, I suppose, right. But what are some of the basic principles of that WCAG that people might want to look out for?
Yeah, so it begins with how your website is designed. So for folks that are hard of need higher contrast or larger text, we want to make sure that you use colors that are high enough contrast, so you're not putting a light blue text in front of a slightly less blue background. It's something that can pop and people can read it easily. And there's other more functional things, like you can't use a color that's it's only a color and it's a cue for something. So like if it's a required field in a form, just outlining it in red, it doesn't cut it. You have to have like, the word required next to it. And then, on the build side, you need to talk to your website partner about this, but making sure that people with mobility issues they don't necessarily navigate the site using their mouse. They'll need to either use the tab key or other keys to navigate your site. And through the development, your site can be built in a way that allows that. And then on the content side, there are things like, when people are going through and looking on your site using screen readers, for example, those programs will go through and pull what's called alt text for your images. And so that'll describe what content is in the image so they can have the context and not lose any of that information. And that also applies to things that are maybe like information within an image, or if it's a graphic or like an infographic, having that alt text that describes that information is super important. And then other things like making sure that your videos have captions. And, another big thing is if you have PDF downloads on your website, you can make PDFs accessible as well.
Those are a lot of really great tips. I know that we've got it wrong, in the past, and we've learned just in terms of, for example, if you're watching this on Zoom, it's not captioned, but we do have an option for captioning on Facebook. And some of these things we have learned the hard way, and you certainly don't like to be caught unprepared. So what would be your first piece of advice to the business owners watching and how they can figure out how accessible their site is and maybe what they would need to do next?
So there are tools that you can use. It's easy to Google. You can, that check for accessibility on your website. You should kind of treat that kind of like you treat spell check. It's not always accurate. It needs a human to interpret it and, make sure that it's right. So it does take humans to do this work. There's no easy button. So, you need to talk to your website partner, your web developer, and make sure that you're doing these things, because it's becoming more and more important. The scary thing about this is you can get sued, especially if you have a physical location. You can get sued for having a business website that is not ADA compliant.
Well, thank you, Marion, for coming on and explaining a little bit about this. I know we're undergoing a project to ensure our site is continually updated and accessible and friendly to all who visit. So we appreciate your partnership, your membership, and your expertise in this area.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right. So Brian has joined us. Brian, you want to share a little bit about what you were up to today?
Yeah, actually actually before I even do that, I just want to mention that how awesome Brightly is. They do our website, and if you've been on our website, you see how easy it is to navigate, especially if you've been a member of ours for a long time. It used to be kind of clunky, it was built up over time, and it just, things stacked on top of other things. It wasn't designed well, and Brightly came in and kind of saved the day. I put our website up against any other business association or any other association across the board. We've got so much great content. Being able to easily find it is important. Brightly has been really top rate partners in this whole process. So there's the legal stuff that you've been talking about here and how important it is to be compliant and accessible, and but then also just the user experience overall for everybody visiting the website. They could not say more about what Brightly has done for SBAM. So I was over in Oakland County. It's a panel with Milan Gandhi, who's one of our former board chairs, and also Tim Greimel, who's the new mayor of Pontiac, just talking about economic development issues and creating an environment of success around small businesses and in an area that's really dynamic. We're actually in Troy, is where this panel was held with a local economic focus group, but but glad to make it back. Came in a little bit hot, it's risky these days to try and get around the state with all the orange barrels. But of course, there's a lot of work that needs to be done out there.
Yeah, we drove to Ann Arbor yesterday and kind of played a game about how many orange barrels do you think the state of Michigan has, because we were counting them by mile. So I guess that's what you do on a road trip these days. As we continue on with the show, we wanted to talk more about other content that we've been sharing recently. And this was an interesting article on Gen Z and what matters most to them in terms of work. So I'm a Gen Xer. Brian, you are as well. So I do find these generational differences interesting. But what can we learn from this new study on Gen Z's work habits?
Yeah, and this will become more and more important because, just for definition's sake, Gen Z would be those workers that are 25 years old or younger. So these are the newest people into the workforce, and have very different ideas of what it needs to look like and what it needs to accommodate. So in terms of the type of work that is preferred, probably not surprising, a hybrid work. Actually, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit surprising to me that in the survey that's featured in this this content that we had put out, 45% indicated hybrid work. Not remote was not the number one, hybrid was. So this idea of some remote but some in person was the top choice. Number two was fully remote at 29%, so 45% to 29% fully remote, and then about a quarter, 24% said office-based work. So the survey also revealed that for the youngest of our workforce, that a caring and supportive workplace is not just a nice to have, but a must have, that's. That I couldn't express how different that is from somebody my generation. People in my generation, so I'm 45 years old, people about my age and maybe a little older, the idea of letting feelings get in the way of stuff, it's just not how we operate. But the thing is that, every generation is very different than the one before. So, kind of understanding and speaking to these differences, of course, can make a big difference. There was now 53% of these workers, these Gen Z workers, do plan on being at the same company a year from now than they are from today. So not planning on making any kind of immediate moves. That's good, except for there's 47% that apparently are. Of those who are thinking of quitting their jobs, 42% cited burnout or a lack of work-life balance as the top reason. There's a whole slew of information. I think we'll put maybe a link to the article in the comment section, but just a few other things to highlight. 82% of Gen Z employees find it important to have mental health days, and about half want mental health training. So this idea of mental health overall is something that maybe certainly 20 years ago was rarely discussed in the workplace. 77% find it important to work for a company that cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also, another thing, a lot of small businesses haven't really dialed into this. Bigger companies have really leaned into DEI programs or activities, or having value statements and actions to go along with it. Smaller companies don't necessarily have, like a DEI plan, just like they wouldn't have a legal staff, or they wouldn't have, these are the sorts of things, though, that an incoming generation would be potentially looking for. But what the top reasons why Gen Z might consider quitting, I thought it was pretty telling. Number one, and this is what I think makes, it's one of the things that unify people. Number one reason that somebody in that generation might think of quitting: unsatisfactory salary. Okay, so that's I'm pretty sure that millennials and Gen X and baby boomers feel the same. So it's one of the kind of unifying things. Still, at the very, very basic level, competitive salary being important. But number two, coming in at 42%, citing burnout and lack of work-life balance as being something that might trigger them to consider making a change. And then coming in at number three was not doing what they're passionate about. So being kind of mission focused. We talked a little bit about this. It's one of the things I've really appreciated about our association here. A lot of long-term employees at SBAM, people that have made careers out of working for this association. And I think it has a lot to do with the mission and how much people really appreciate the mission. It's a great place to work in a lot of ways, but it's work that you really feel good about doing. And I feel great about doing. And I think that a lot of people that work here feel the same way. But that idea of tapping into a mission for this generation, according to this survey, is particularly important. There's all kinds of additional information in this layout that I think it would be worth checking out. So if you have younger workers, or if you're getting to a point where you're going to start going after some younger workers, I think it would be worth 5 minutes of your time to really contemplate whether or not your work environment would be well suited for the types of preferences that are starting to show up with this generation.
That's a really good point. It's important to remind ourselves that not everybody has the same values and characteristics that we hold, and to have different kinds of communication is certainly important. So last Thursday was a gubernatorial debate. How did that go? Did you get a chance to tune in?
I did. I watched it. It was broadcast on by Sinclair, which owns a lot of TV stations around the state. So I went ahead and tuned in, and there were 8 of the 10 candidates running for the Republican nomination that were there. It was held in Livingston County. There was a reporter that works for MERS News Service, who is actually a partner with SBAM and some of their some of our communications to our grassroots network. And so anyway, the editor for MERS News was the person who moderated the debate. And 8 people is a lot of people to have on the stage, and so it's really difficult for any candidate to kind of break out and shine in that environment. The 2 that weren't there, Donna Brandenburg, who is somebody that is not a particularly well-known candidate, but then also on the other end of the spectrum, probably the best known candidate, or at least among the top 3 or 4, James Craig, had another engagement that he chose over the debate. But still, 8 candidates there. They were fairly aggressive in terms of their trying to make the most of the amount of time that they had. Again, you're sharing the stage with 8 people. It's hard to shine or stand out. But all of these candidates they really did kind of go after it. They had a lot of agreement, as you might imagine. These are people that are running for one party's nomination. And so the things that they disagreed with were kind of on the margins. And so I thought it was noteworthy that a few of the candidates, actually a couple of the top candidates, in terms of their standings in the polls and resources to go the distance with it, Kevin Rinke and Perry Johnson both talked about elimination of the income tax, which is the main business tax that a business owner would pay. It would be a big feat to get rid of the income tax, but both had expressed some desire to do that. I thought that Garrett Saldano, who is has been in the, not really in the gubernatorial race the longest, but actually he was the first one to turn in signatures. I thought displayed a lot of charisma in the way that he answered. I could go back down the list and give some pros and cons to all of them. But I think at the end of the day, these debates at this stage are more about the candidates kind of honing their skills and the practice kind of in situations that are outside of their control, and kind of dealing with zingers and defending yourself and just trying to get that point across in a very, very noisy political environment. So, these, I didn't think that anybody ran away with it, but I did think that I saw a stage full of people that really wanted it. And that's one of the things when you run for governor. I got a little bit of experience with this, but it's a huge undertaking, and so you've really got to want it. On the other end of this of the spectrum, you see Governor Whitmer, who will not be challenged in her primary. So really, her election doesn't really start this early. She can afford to spend some more time kind of looking gubernatorial and doing gubernatorial things. It's an advantage that incumbents have. It wasn't like a game. I didn't see it as a game changer. I didn't see anybody kind of break out and change the dynamics of the race. I still think that the candidates going into that debate were, the ones that were at the top, probably wasn't anything that would have changed their fortunes too much. And there'll be another one that'll be narrower up on Mackinac Island for the Detroit Regional Chamber Mackinac Policy Conference, but they're only inviting who they consider to be the top 5 candidates. So wholly different scenario when you're sharing the stage with five other candidates. Whether or not all 5 of those candidates are going to come and participate in that debate, I don't know, but I know at least a few of them have already committed. So we'll keep close track of this race as we go through. And by the way, as a disclaimer, SBAM has not taken a position in the primary. We do not intend to get involved in kind of endorsing or selecting a candidate for the gubernatorial race or considering that until after the primary date. It wouldn't be till September, when traditionally we would evaluate whether or not the organization would get involved. So at this point, consider us to be neutral, interested parties, and just trying to bring the best information to our viewers.
All right, so it is Data Monday, and I've kind of been enjoying the less information having to be shared about COVID, but numbers are rising in Michigan. Masks are now being recommended by the CDC in some counties. So what's the latest?
Yeah, so let's just take a look at the numbers, and before I get into like these charts and the descriptions around the charts and things, I think it is worth noting that OSHA, or MyOSHA, Michigan's OSHA that does the workplace safety rules, they do look at, technically they look at CDC recommendations when they consider whether or not you're meeting your general obligation to provide a workplace that's free from hazards. And so when 15 or 16 of our counties, if you go to michigan.gov and follow the coronavirus link right at the very top of the page, it'll show a map and the CDC counties color coded for who's high, medium, and low transmission. So technically, if somebody lodged a complaint and you're in one of the high transmission areas, you might find that OSHA, technically they could find, although I'd be really surprised right now if they did. There doesn't seem to be that type of enforcement happening out there, but just so that you know, that risk of the general duty obligation to provide a workplace free from hazards goes up when the CDC recommendations are not followed. Okay, so here's looking at the different regions in our state. You see Rhode Island, or in our country, Rhode Island is the highest state. The Northeast is the highest region. We see everything going up, but maybe leveling off here. You see all of these have leveled off a little bit. So looking at the entire period of the pandemic, you'll see that the United States of America overall cases have risen, more than doubled since a month ago, but just showing some signs of maybe leveling off, and this would be a good place to level off. Of course, nowhere near as high as we saw last time. Looking at nationwide hospitalization and ICUs, you see ICU intensive care units, so the most serious of cases, staying low, hospitalization rising. No way of knowing how many of these hospitalizations are people that are in the hospital because of COVID. It's just that they test everybody who is hospitalized. And then deaths, you'll see staying relatively low, even though that hospitalization number was rising. Again, good. Good. I mean, this gives me a lot of confidence. This is enough like inherent immunity between vaccines and previous infections that it's really going to hold the serious cases much, much lower. Here's just a look at Michigan and the map where things stand right now. You can see, some areas the transmission rate higher, but the whole state is more orange than it was before. And then looking at the map, you see that it's kind of frustratingly jagged here. There's no more smooth lines because they only report once a week. But you see it is going up, but it's harder to see when it might be leveling off in Michigan because of just the once a week reporting. Looking at hospitalization up, ICU flat, so just like the US numbers. So this, I think, is a very encouraging sign that that many of these cases are probably not people who are hospitalized because they have COVID, just found to have COVID once they got to the hospital. As long as you see the ICU staying quite low, and fatalities staying low here in Michigan as well. So this is one of those cases, Sarah, where it seems like so no question that numbers have risen percentage-wise quite a bit from just a month ago. But Michigan's kind of trend looks just like the United States as a whole. And that's not always been the case in the past. So it's kind of interesting to see, the Northeast definitely led this, I'm hoping will be kind of a mini wave compared to last time. But really the entire country has followed the same sort of trajectory, just a little bit different on the scale. So, but the good news is, even though Michigan's numbers are only reported weekly, so it's hard to see trends early in our numbers. If you look nationwide, it looks like every region of the state may be starting to level off. So we'll see. But the risk of regulatory pressure definitely goes up when CDC masking requirements come back. And for, I believe it was 16, I was counting through the counties on the state's map just before we went on, and I think it was 16 counties, or maybe it was 15 that are in that transmission range. So please do, if you go to michigan.gov, there's a coronavirus link. It's right near the top of the website. If you follow that through, there's a map. Makes it easy just to kind of take a look at it. Not that I think there's an expectation that people are going to change their procedures in workplaces, but just something to be aware of.
All right. Well, thank you for that report. That is all we have for today's show. We will see you back here on Thursday.
See you on Thursday, everybody.